All right, welcome back, everyone, to Visions for the Future of Higher Ed. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. Today, I have Dr. James Steller with me, and many of you might know him. He's had a prolific career in higher education. But for those who might be new to the field and the sector, I'd like to give a quick background on him before we get started. He is, of course, an extremely distinguished leader in the field of higher education. He has held key leadership roles, including serving as the interim president of the University of Albany. He was also the provost and the senior vice president for academic affairs. His career actually spans a couple decades here with experience at institutions like Queens College, Harvard University, and Northeastern University, where he served as the dean of the College of Arts and Science. Dr. Steller also is an expert in the neuroscience of learning. And in 2017, I believe it was, published a book that was called Education That Works, the Neuroscience of Building a More Effective Higher Education. So with those quick facts, I hope you're as excited as I am for this conversation with Dr. Steller today, who goes by Jim. So I'll be calling him Jim for the rest of the episode here. But Jim, is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of your background and experience before I start asking you some questions today?
Just briefly, the first part of my career, which did start at Harvard in 1978, was as a neuroscience researcher with rats on cocaine. And so the joke about me is I had a federal license to buy cocaine, and I did, and I gave it to rats. We were trying to figure out how the brain of the rat reacted to cocaine to make it an addict. And that's not a stupid thing to do because our brains in that area are fairly similar. And I'll bring that up a little bit later when we talk about experiential education, because I think the emotional side of that is kind of the same thing where you're getting a gut sense of whether this internship is leading to something for your career or not.
Well, thank you for adding that detail. I think people will definitely be curious to learn a bit more about that. I know you're actually working on a second book as well, Professional Wisdom, that maybe we can touch on later as well.
Happy to do so. And that's Professional Wisdom Development in college students by the direct experiences they have with internships and things that complement their choice of field. Like I want to be an accountant, and so I'm studying accounting, or I want to be a doctor, I'm studying biology.
Sure. That sounds perfect. Well, I'm definitely going to be asking some questions about that. But to take a step way back before we start talking about the future, I'm curious, what made you want to pursue a career in higher education to begin with, Jim? What kind of got this started for you and kicked off your journey in higher ed?
Well, there were really two starts. The first start was as a college student, becoming interested in the brain and then figuring out that I could get into graduate school and get a degree in it. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And it diverted me from going to medical school, for which my mother was mad at me for about a year. But then she wanted me to be happy. And so I spent a good 20 years with wonderful students and working in a lab. And in fact, after I left Harvard and moved to Northeastern, I was a professor there. I was a co-op employer because that's a school that does co-op. And I hired my own students from my classes to work with me on my grants for 6 months, and I watched them turn into virtual graduate students even though they were still undergrads. And then from there, I watched them get into great medical schools. In fact, just to put a bow on that, I noticed that towards the end of my career, as I was moving into the dean's office and taking a second career, my students were succeeding in getting into Ivy League medical schools the way my Harvard students did way back when I first started there, but they were from Northeastern, which was at the time ranked about 175 in U.S. News. Another conversation we could have is how Northeastern dramatically improved through having this kind of a program which appealed to students.
I would love to talk about that because, I mean, you've actually taken on a number of leadership roles across multiple institutions in your career. And so I would be interested to know a little bit about, the vision you had for each institution at the time, because I can, of course, imagine that changing as the landscape changed. So when you took on that first leadership role, after having been a faculty member, what was on your mind at the time? What were you working towards, and which institution was that at?
Well, I think you make decisions in life maybe on your gut because something really appeals to you, and it appealed to me to be in administration in a minor way, first starting in the department. But I became the dean of the college of about 300 faculty, 22 departments. And in arts and sciences, the cooperative education model was not really robust. And my predecessor, for whom I was associate dean briefly, and I decided that we should try to bring that into alignment, not that we would make every history major take a co-op job, but that we would sort of emphasize experiential learning, which is what we decided to call it, And it could be things like doing undergraduate research or study abroad, but we front and center co-op, and that seemed to really produce a big benefit. Now, why exactly, we don't know. We did some major advertising as a university. I was on that committee, and millennials came along, and basically I think the short story is that we had a 95% placement as a university in jobs or graduate school or medical school or something like that. And the students at that time thought, well, we don't want to live in our mother's basement when we graduate, so we're going to go to Northeastern. So what it did was it blew up the applicant pool, which went from my college for 1,100 students from 5,000 to 15,000. And the quality of the pool improved. So while I was dean, this never happens. We went double the size of the college through doubling the freshman class size. And the SAT scores went up 250 points. And that set the university itself on an upward trajectory. And I heard from someone last year, they admitted 5.2% of their applicant pool, which is kind of like Ivy League. And they're ranked now in the 40s as opposed to or 50 instead of 175. So it made the institution very successful as a business, but it also made the students successful because they were getting into good places because they were growing up through the direct experience. The way Northeastern worked and co-op schools, Drexel and Cincinnati work, is you take 6 months off every 6 months or so, that's how we did it, to be a full-time employee at some place, like Massachusetts General Hospital if you're pre-med, or Ernst & Young if you're an accounting major. Accounting obviously is not an arts and sciences. And so it just seemed to give everybody an additional perspective, and it made them better students. I thought when they were back, they were more mature. We used to say in the dean's office that a student like you, Imran, would leave at age 19 to go out for a 6-month co-op and come back like a 25-year-old. And so that was good for us in terms of teaching. It was good for admissions. It was good for everything. And that really was where that insight came to me, that experiential education was powerful and applied to everybody, not just people in accounting or engineering where they tended to do it, but in history and English. And so that, I think, was that thing that I've always carried with me. And I carried that with me into the subsequent positions that I took, because I did move after 10 years of being dean, after 20 years of being in that university, to a public. And that's how I wound up here. I decided I, for some reason, wanted to be, I know what I wanted to be, where the action was, which I thought was in generating education for students that could afford it. Northeastern's tuition went way up, and so Queens College, where I went next, and then up to Albany, was capped by the state at a tuition that was on the order of $10,000, which gave us a student body that was much more diverse socioeconomically in other ways as well. And then the trick is to try to apply that experiential technique to the students in a public university, and that is a bit of a challenge because believe it, there's a budget that's involved, and we have to hire people to do the things that Northeastern did. And that really was the essence of my career. I think that's a delicious challenge, but it's important to the students, which is where I'm focused now, back to the faculty teaching again. I can see it in the students. And we can even talk maybe a little bit about how this is brain natural, which is something that we also say with me as a neuroscientist.
Well, you almost can take for granted that the co-op program is as robust as it is now and so well known and respected. But it's amazing to think that at the time, that was an innovation and that was something that needed to be figured out. So it just goes to show, how much you've done for this field, Jim, because I think a lot of people look to Northeastern for guidance on how to set up these co-op programs. And it's still something that I think a lot of schools are trying to get right. There are many programs I speak to who they don't have a co-op component of the program, but I hear time and time again the value of what students get from having been involved in these experiential learning opportunities. So before we kind of move on to the next role you had and what the vision was for that institution, for the schools and administrative teams that are trying to figure out how to improve their co-op programs, I think one of the number one concerns they have is how to build strong employer relations.
Right.
Do you have guidance on how how do you get to a 95% placement rate? That's unbelievable.
Well, it is unbelievable, and it might be hard to attain with a budget. One of the things that provosts and presidents do is worry about making sure all the faculty and staff are paid and the students get their scholarships, and that's money. And that depends on enrollment, so there's a connection. But then you have to have the outlay I learned when I went to Queens College that in order to generate the revenue to hire the people that would do the co-op placements like we did at Northeastern, you'd have to shut down the sociology and the history department. You can't do that. So we have to be more innovative, and that's where I think technology comes in. Companies come in. And you work for one of those companies, I know, called InStage, which helps students to practice their internship interview without having to draw down the salary time and the staff time of people online. It's automated. It uses AI avatars, for example. So I think that there are ways that we could get better. And that's the thing I'm going to focus on, not be discouraged about the fact that these institutions like Northeastern, Drexel, Cincinnati are 100 years old and have been always doing this. So it isn't a shock to the system to have the investment in the cooperative education staff, faculty, and training. So that's where the employers come in. Now, we do lots of things here at Albany, for example, like we have a program where we encourage our alumni to try to talk to our students. And that's a good outreach because they want to do that anyway. It's cultivation for them. Maybe we'll ask them for gifts if they turn out to be successful, for scholarships and things like that. And lots of universities have those kinds of programs as part of their alumni operation. And then faculty can do things. We might know companies. If you're a scientist, for example, and you work in the neuroscience field, you might know biotech industries that are local. And you might even work with them in a collaborative research thing, and you can just bring those students in. And don't forget undergraduate research. You don't have to pay the students necessarily. It's better if you do, because that way they can really focus on it. But you can have volunteers in your research operation, whether you've got a laboratory like I used to have, or whether you're doing something in history or sociology where the students might not have a physical lab, but they can still work with you on your projects. All of that strengthens something that I think is in the brain, deep in the brain. I call it the limbic system, it's emotions, which gives you that sort of feeling, that gut feeling. I don't know if you ever read the book where Prusik talked about The Mechanic's Feel, which is that book about his journey with his son from years ago. It was when I was young. But this mechanic's feel, this gut level feeling that comes along with experience is something that can really complement higher education and the academic learning that happens in the classroom. We just have to think of it. And so one of the changes is to get the faculty, and I tried to do this in my administrative positions, more about the individual students and where they're going. Not because it's vo-tech, but because it helps them to be educated at a gut level, at a limbic level, at an emotional level, as well as at a cognitive level where you can say the facts and theories about something that's in your major. So it's good for the students at both levels, and it's good for the university if we can get enrollments up. And you have to be careful these days because we do know that some universities, are private ones, particularly small ones, are actually going out of business.
Yeah, I mean, that is a difficulty I'm hearing about daily right now.
Right.
But I mean, the other group that largely benefits from this type of student experience, of course, is the employer as well, because having students with that gut level feel for what needs to be done is something I know many are looking for. But, how are they supposed to develop that sense without the experience?
Well, there's lots of little things you can do, too. For example, when I was an administrator, provost, and particularly as president and dean, where I got out a lot and talked to the employers, sometimes it was because they were alumni and we were trying to get them to take an interest in the university. They would say things to me like, look, your guys know the facts and the theories, but they can't really write a persuasive memo. They can't really make a sales pitch. If you could teach them to do that, we would hire your students over other people. So how do you do that? Well, for example, your company and I are collaborating on a course together, Intro Psych of all things, the very beginning. And we have the students in that class looking at a quick video and then answering quiz questions about that. And right now, half of them are doing it on the learning module as a typing exercise for 20 minutes, and half of them are talking to avatars and having a conversation with them. And we've just started that this semester, just a couple of weeks ago, and it seems to be working. But people that think it's weird and don't want to do it, but there's a whole group of people that think this is fun. And I think they're also learning to express the concepts from the class in a way that's persuasive to this avatar. And of course, it doesn't take any of my time for them to do that. I do look at what they do to try to make sure that it's on track. But I'm not the one that is talking to them individually. Your avatar is that guy named David.
That's right.
And so this is simulation. And so we can do some simulations and other things. We can have more essay tests. We can have more group work. We can have more presentations. And we can use technology to practice a job interview for an internship. And all these things make the student what they want, which is to be more active. It's just not in the ancient history of universities, which came from monasteries, and they've really got the classroom down now. And the professors and everybody, the students, they all know it. It's high school on a larger scale with people that are more expert in their discipline, perhaps. But it doesn't. It's an ivory tower, and we need to be careful to let that ivory tower have holes in it so students can get out and test some of these ideas, and then that gives them that passion that lets them be able to talk persuasively and the experience of doing it. So it's doable. It's just going to be a bit of a challenge, because what I would really like is for everybody to have a nice big budget to be able to hire some staff to be able to make this happen. But we can figure this out. Come on. We just have to work on it. And I think it's being demanded by the marketplace. Now, I think the students are saying, I don't want to go here because you're an ivory tower. I want to go there because these guys seem to be doing okay when they graduate.
I think students are recognizing that, and the programs that promote those industry partnerships and the ability to kind of get out there and try some of the things they're learning are getting the recognition they deserve from the field, but also students, are spreading the word about the opportunities they have, which I think is more powerful than anything.
The word of mouth.
Exactly.
The best advertising, and that comes from the students actually being treated well. And who do they want to be treated well by? The professors. They do like all the other people, the staff and the advisors and everything else, but the professors are the main reason they came there, to take those classes with those experts. So if they'll just take a slight interest in the students and have this kind of attitude in mind, I think we can do something. Now, changing institutions is a matter of incremental steps. You take a step, you see how it feels, you make some modifications, you take another step. And I think if we want to stay in business and we want to be robust and strong and be able to hire that Chaucer scholar in the English department, we'd better have the students taken care of in a way that they and their families think is useful to them. And I think one of the ways is this. Now, of course, we need other things. We need good residence halls and proper food in the cafeteria. But this is the most important thing, because this is why they came here. They're spending their time and their money to try to get something out of it, which is, I'd like to have a career when I leave, even if it's a matter of going on to further training in graduate school or medical school or law school. We should do that to them. And then the word will get spread and the enrollments will be okay, healthy. So I think the market forces are actually right now pushing universities in the direction that I personally would like to see them go for the benefit of the students.
I think so too. And I appreciate you mentioning our collaboration. I'm looking forward to seeing how technology plays a role in enabling these programs and faculty to do more. But I'm wondering, again, having been part of the leadership team in so many different institutions, did you see any patterns emerge when you're trying to introduce new technology to help in that way so they can do more?
I think that's an excellent question, and I would say it's more than just technology. It's also new programs. So if you want to bring cooperative education-like programs, even if they're not going to be fully implemented, to an institution which has thought of itself as almost an ivory tower, as a good thing, we're pulling back to really study and think and teach critical thinking, you have to get the faculty on your side. So I've been told there's two types of leaders. Machiavelli said this: they fear you or they love you. Now, that might be too emotional, but there's people that are centralizers and people that are distributors. So I think one of the things that I found that worked in administration is to try to be someone who was sensitive to other people. So, for example, as dean, I had my secretary reverse half of my meetings. So they would come to my office as department chairs to discuss things. I said, all right, now every other time, roughly, can you send me to their office? I get some steps in, and then I get to see them and look at where they're from. Builds a rapport. And so if I ask them to do something, maybe they're more likely to listen to me. And maybe we then can build a better cohesive group of the department chairs. And the same thing when I was provost with the deans. These are small things to do. For example, another thing I did was try to take each dean out to dinner once a year, just me and them, and talk about what was on their minds, a chance for them to lobby me or discuss or inform me. And that would build a good rapport. So I think there's a type of leadership that is very good at developing new ideas, which are often a little bit of a challenge. And what am I going to do? I'm a history professor. How am I going to help a student with employment? Well, didn't you just publish a book? Couldn't you use a student who's really good to be sort of a reference checker for some of the things that you wrote? And then maybe you and they get to know each other. And then when the time comes for them to apply to grad school, because now they're inspired, you could write a great letter for them because you know them. It's not just you had them in a class. All of that is of the same part. And the reason it's of the same part, it's all this sort of gut level connection between students and faculty, students and knowledge, students in the field, employers, and the university. So I think there's a way to do all this, but it's a challenge. I do admit it. If you're 100 years old and always had the co-op program, it was a lot easier to take arts and sciences and fit it into that existing model because we had the staff, even though we had to increase the staff as we increased the participation. And you notice we tweaked it. We made it experiential education, and we said, all right, if you don't want to go on co-op, which we think is a bad idea, you should try it, but we're not going to require it. Why don't you do undergraduate research? Why don't you go to a foreign country on study abroad, and we'll give you credit if you'll take a course on that country, like on its language or its history. And so we had all these things in, and that became a graduation requirement for the College of Arts and Sciences. And what happened was when the students graduated, they thought, you know what? That institution helped me grow up, get a job, and that's what I'm going to tell my friends. Go to Northeastern because it's a place that takes care of the students, all the students. It's got great faculty, got good courses, nice academics, but it's also got this. And I think that sort of seeped into the way. Now, do you win every battle? No. And sometimes you have to just let the losses go because you want to maintain the cohesiveness of the team. So building a team of administrators is really important. And I think you do that through the same sort of emotional connection with them, which I was trying to do as a trick by visiting them in their offices every other time. And I think it worked because I had a wonderful career as a senior administrator. And now I'm very lucky to be back to the faculty, starting over at the beginning again. In fact, I think I sort of just earned the equivalent of tenure for myself, I already have it, by being back 5 years and partnering with you and your company to try to bring some of that feeling into the classroom, the standard classroom. Our students in that Psych 1 class don't go out anywhere, but they talk to people. They have almost like mentoring experiences when the student is looking at David and David says to them, could you explain to me the role of prediction in Pavlovian classical conditioning? Right. And then they have to talk. And they like it, it turns out, after the first initial doing. And then I get a transcript and I grade their answers to make sure that it's right because I'm monitoring it. But they're telling me, and we'll see how this continues to work out, that it's helping them connect with the ideas, which will help them connect with their employment when they have to speak to customers as an employee. Well, just a little bit. I mean, it's one class.
But I mean, it's just another great example of how, so many of the things I think we've talked about already, Jim, distill down to these human level connections. Because I think it's incredibly admirable that your approach to leadership was to go to the faculty member's office or to take out the dean to a dinner and give them a chance to talk. I think sometimes the initial gut reaction is, well, we need to implement a large program or some kind of professional development, which makes a lot of sense, but it can also be just a little bit simpler, a little bit more hands-on. So absolutely challenging, profoundly impactful. Hats off.
Let me just reinforce that very quickly by saying that when I came here as provost, the then president, Robert Jones, said, I want you to do two things. I want you to start an engineering college out of the computer science and informatics department. And you have no money to do this with. So I had to get all the other colleges to agree to let us make some initial investments and incrementally build and get them to think, he's not going to take the money away from the English department in order to fund those engineers because he's going to build the college and make it better. And there was lots of conversations and that is working. And the other thing that happened was that then governor, who was Andrew Cuomo, gave us a college of emergency preparedness, cybersecurity, and homeland security. And that was a startup. That turned out to be very popular with the students. And that created a crisis because there were too many students for us to handle with the money we had. And we had to chase that every year. And that required the cooperation of those wonderful people in that college that were working hard as we built it up. It was kind of like a startup, but you had to have some kind of channel of communication with them to see the little things that happened, get them to work a little bit harder, put some supplemental effort in because we were doing something together. So how do you get them around that vision? Well, it has to be their vision, which means you have to actually really spend some time with them as opposed to write a good memo and send it to them and expect it to be done. That human level. So it's the same thing, I think, with the students as it is, as you said, with the faculty and with the staff and the administrators. It's a matter of getting them to see the vision. For the student, the vision is enjoy your freshman year, but after that, should you be thinking a little bit about what you're going to do when you graduate? And for the faculty, it's this program is going to cost some things. We're going to have to shoulder that burden, but let's try to make it so that it pays for itself by being very attractive to students, faculty in it getting good grants, which gives overhead return to the university, all those kinds of things. And so I just point out those two examples because it illustrates your point.
Well, I appreciate the insight in a big way, Jim, because I think that's an extremely tangible approach to helping make some change. And I know I don't have you, I've already taken you for longer than I asked for, but I have 1.5 questions left just based on what you're saying here, and I'll keep it to that. I heard a great thing in one of the last episodes I did that was, there's a bit of a leadership gap in higher education now. And there's this next wave of young leaders that are coming into the space. And so my question to you is, what kind of guidance can you give them? What kind of advice or insights would you share with young leaders who are coming into higher ed, who are looking to take on the challenge of integrating AI, new technology, whatever is coming next? What kind of wisdom would you impart to them?
Well, I think I do a little bit of this, just it's natural. I have undergraduates that I think I'm the mentor for, and I have senior people, even up through university presidents that knew me on the way, for whom I'm an advisor, let's put it that way. And I think one of the things that I try to tell them is you must be positive. Now, you have to work on that because sometimes that means you have to do some things to get to that positivity state, but have a positive vision, get out, be happy yourself. You love what you do, don't you? So let that show. Now, it doesn't mean you don't also have to be disciplined. And occasionally, you might even have to fire some people. But when you do that, it should be seen by them as, or the community as a last resort effort, and not something that you did because you didn't like something that they said about you. So I think you joined this business for a reason. I often say that to professors that you're like painters. You work to live and live to paint.
Yeah.
So we love what we do. Let that come out. Let that enjoyment, that positivity come out. You'd be surprised how infectious it is, how many good ideas you'll get back, that some of them which you didn't think of. And that leads to, so you have it now as a young person. Don't lose it. That's just stay where you are now. You're going to grow in experience, but keep that emotion because that's what makes people want to follow you, want to work with you. And that's what you need as a provost or president or dean. You need it a little less as a department chair because that's sort of a first among equals, and there's a nice way in which that group can stay cohesive as the leadership rotates. But being dean or provost or president is much more serious. You can create much more problems or do much more good, and therefore people are a little wary of you. So you need to build that rapport with them that you have with your friends and colleagues.
I really
So
like that.
don't worry so much about conflict of interest. You can't have it, but try to get out there and make that human connection somehow. And I like my favorite trick of go to their office, but there's all kinds of other things that you can do. Talk to them. One of the things that I liked about me that they said when I was provost was that he was a professor provost because he would stop on the way between meetings to talk to students. And I thought that was a good example to lead and also kept me energized and gave me some information because I would ask them, so how is the freshman seminar going? Is it enjoyable? Do you like it? Is it helping or wasting your time? And they would say, oh, it was great. Or no, I didn't like it at all. And then I could go back and talk to the freshman seminar people and say, you're doing this to help improve retention. And it looks like it's working. But I heard this. What do you think about that? And they're like, oh, this guy's actually talking to our customers.
Oh, that is such a different approach, Jim, than, just looking at the numbers. Actually getting, again, so much of what I'm gaining from this conversation is about bringing it back to the human connection, talking to people and doing it, face to face, where you actually get an emotional read on what people are feeling and experiencing. So I really appreciate that sort of insight.
So if I may, to just sort of put a boundary on that, one of the first things I did when I came to Albany was get my research guy, and we made up a profile of every department, which listed not only the papers that they produced, not all of them, but their summaries of them, and the number of faculty. But in the center of it was a chart, and the chart had their revenue over 5 years and their expenses over 5 years. And we gave that PDF file with all the department things in to every dean and every department chair. And so the sociology department could see what the history department was doing. And I told them, look, if you come to me and your curves are close together so that you're not making enough money so we can afford to mow the grass as a university, it's going to be harder for me to give you a replacement when one of your faculty retires. So you're going to need a really good vision statement. On the other hand, if you're making money because people are enrolling and 80% of the revenue came from tuition in this university and 80% of the expenses came from faculty salaries. So there was a data structure that underlay it.
Fair
And
enough.
sharing that information, getting it out, I think was part of hopefully being generous because you could see what we were thinking and also challenging in a way. Can you think of something to do? Maybe you want to talk to the people in that other department, find out what they're doing, and then come to me and say, all right, look, through the dean, we want to hire this new faculty member because this guy retires because here's what we're going to do. And so that complemented, I hope, the sort of what a nice guy, we trust him kind of image that I would also like to present is that he's listening to some real information. And if we don't get this right, we could end up being one of those universities that gets in trouble financially. We don't want to do that because then we have to fight that battle. And that's not the battle we want to fight. We want to fight the battle of what should we be studying? How do we educate our students? So to keep it positive, you have to pay attention to the data. And the data are financial, and we don't want the department faculty worrying about that, but the chairs should, and there should be a little conversation about how can we present ourselves so that we're not drawing down the resources of other departments in order to get things we want, like a replacement.
That's I'm really glad you added that clarification because of course that data is extremely important. And I think again, adding that, humanizing it so that we're keeping in mind there are people connected to these data points is what made you such a successful leader.
Thank you for that. I think it's kind of funny because as someone who's now back to the faculty, I see some of these same principles with the students. I make my students write. So I'm sort of unpopular that way because they have to take all essay tests. And it does mean that I have to spend the weekend grading them when they come up. That's okay. But yet I emphasize this is for a reason, guys. You're going to have to write when you're out on the express a concept to your boss, to your customer, to your patient if you're a doctor. So let's start it now. Let's practice it now. And if you don't want to do that, there are other Psych 1 classes that you could take. But if you're going to be in my class, this is how we're going to roll. And it does seem like the course is popular. And so I think we're able to do that. So I think the same thing happens because the same people are there. They're just younger versions of ourselves, less expert, but they have the same hearts.
Yeah.
And the same heads. And we need to make sure that we're engaging both, no matter what we're doing, whether it's teaching or leading or using technology,
Right.
which is why I chose David as the avatar because he seems engaging and happy and funny. And I can tell you stories about what he's doing to the students in these little conversations where he's asking the questions. He asks follow-up questions. And one of the students told him, I listened to the transcript, I'm sorry, that's not on the exam. The other person engaged with him on that follow-up question. And they had a longish conversation about it, and he says funny things like, we were having a party in the brain with that little structure that you talked about. And the student will react to that sometimes. Sometimes they'll say, no, I'm sorry, I'm done. I need to go do something else. And he says, fine. So the personal engagement isn't a human. They know that. But nevertheless, it gets them a little bit, I think. And I'm hoping when they take their tests, that engagement will show up as them having a better concept of what prediction means in classical conditioning, for example. This is Psych 1. So I think the technology, it can show up there too. And that is why I picked David, because he was, I thought, the most engaging of all the avatars.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. Maybe it happened, through some of our conversations with you that these characters have added a little bit of that sense of humor because I could see, it being, hey, remember that joke about the party in the brain? Well, this is what it corresponds to as a neuroscience concept.
I'm just going to say, this goes to the AI part. I think it's important for me personally not to feel that AI is going to clobber me, but if I can use it, and I can tell you from last year to this year, your avatars are smarter. They are nailing Psych 1 information. Now, I also teach a course on psychopharmacology, and they have a little bit of a ways to go there because that's much more technical and more recent stuff.
Fair enough.
That might not have been read by the AI yet because it's going to take a little while for them to get into the literature. I now have confidence in your avatars to teach Psych 1 material at that level. And these are mainly freshmen and sophomores in different majors. A lot of them are psych. And so I think it's working there. Anyway, it's another challenge that we're going to have to meet. Experiential education, budget, getting enrollments, all these things. We do that, I think, administratively by working together. That's the bottom line, working together. That was my mantra as a leader. I'm not afraid of my own authority, so if I need to do something that's difficult, I will. But let's try to work together in the classroom, in the university.
That's kind of the last question I have for you here. I'm calling it a half question because, you've given us a lot of insights and answers today, but is there a question that you would pose to leaders in the higher education space that you're wondering how to solve, that you would want to approach collaboratively? Is there a question kind of on the top of your mind right now, Jim, that we can put out there, and see what kind of insights we get back from other leaders in the field?
So let me give you two, which are the two things we talked about. One is, how do you use the professors, highly trained researchers that are teaching, and thank God they are, because they're teaching current stuff and they're experts in the field, to pay attention to the students when they're so busy and they've got grants to write and books to write? How do we solve that problem? What do we do? Do we need more teaching professors who are really focused on that, but then are they disrespected? Can we raise them up by giving them tenure and better salaries? And then can there be crosstalk between the two, where the professor that's doing research and teaching learns something from the teaching professor? By the way, we also have research-only professors in universities, and they're useful for the research side. And the second question is AI. It's really a challenge. I ran a class today. I asked my Zoom group students to please run the question that I asked them through AI if they wanted to, and about half of them did, and then tell me whether you think the answer is right. That's what I want you to report out. Here's the 200-word answer that AI gave, Gemini or ChatGPT. That's what they did. And then they said, this is where we disagree with it. So I think that's what you're going to do in your life. And we got to figure out how to integrate that into the university's teaching without letting it diminish us. And maybe that goes to that sort of gut instinct that you have when you have a professor who talks to you after class, a little bit like when I would go visit the dean in their offices of provost, that gets you inspired. But in any case, AI and, for me, experiential education are the two questions that I would ask any administrator. How are you going to try to complement your fine academic learning with learning from experience to keep the kids thinking that you're valuable to them? And how are you going to cope with AI? Those are the two questions I like to ask, and I do when I get my colleagues out for a beer or something.
I think the questions are just as important. Are we asking the right questions here? And I think those are timely questions to ask, and ones that not just leadership, but all academics as a whole will appreciate hearing some insights on. So hopefully we can explore that in future episodes.
Happy to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
And thank you for inviting me. It was a real pleasure talking to you about these ideas.
It was a pleasure having you here, and I truly do hope to have you back in the future to gain even more insights from the amazing career you've had, Jim. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, and thank you and your company for working with me in this little classroom exercise. It's fun.
It is fun.
Good sign. I'm having fun, and the students seem to be so far. It's early days. We'll keep studying them and make sure they are. But let's get together again whenever you want.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Take care.